Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Show your support by visiting US Modernist, massive mid-century modern archives at usmodernist.org, or leave a positive review at Ratings and Reviews on iTunes. Today, author Michael Boyd discusses the Los Angeles design genius that architects loved to hate, Craig Ellwood. And now, the guys voted most likely to eat Twix the wrong way, George Smart and Tom Guild.
Hi, I'm Tom Guild. Twix are for kids, silly wabbit. Oh, wait, is that a wrong sugar product? Is Captain Crunch going to be weighing in on this issue, too? Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Angela Roll. Now, bearing little relation to the truth, realtor Angela Roll was studying at the Architectural Association in London when international architect Norman Foster sat down at an adjacent table, reading From Bauhaus to Our House by Tom Wolfe. Suddenly, for no real reason, two MI5 agents surrounded Foster and switched out his espresso for Folgers.
Oh, no.
After texting her boyfriend, Eric of Notting Hill, she grabbed the power cord from her laptop and tied the first agent to an Eames chair, being careful not to damage the wood. When the second agent was about to attack, Angela quickly 3D printed an axe and hurled it at the adjacent bookshelf on Miesian design that fell and knocked the agent out with its simplicity and beautiful form. It says here, by then, Eric of Notting Hill appeared, as requested, in a tux with 3 cups of perfectly brewed Kona coffee. Foster was so grateful he arranged for Eric and Angela to marry at the British Museum. Today, Angela uses her architectural training to specialize in modernist houses, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to finding the best coffee. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
I'm George Smart. Johnny Burke. Sounds like a cowboy name.
Yeah.
Grew up in Texas, served in the Army, and in 1946 started a construction company with a new name, not for the company, but for him. He was now to be known as Craig Ellwood, a name taken from the Lords and Ellwood liquor store downstairs from his office. Although not a licensed architect, Craig Ellwood was a true design genius and a master of promotion. He was fairly disliked by the formal architecture profession, but he rose to fame when 3 of his houses were included in the iconic Case Study House series at Arts and Architecture magazine. These houses are still incredibly prized today. Our guest, Michael Boyd, is a landscape, furniture, architectural designer. He is the principal of Boyd Design, a consultancy for the restoration and preservation of modernist architecture. And listen to this, kids. He lives in Oscar Niemeyer's only North American house. If you don't know who Oscar Niemeyer is, and he is not Oscar Mayer's younger brother, start Googling. He's one of the most famous architects in the world. Michael is the creator of Plain Furniture, a line of architectural furnishings that's been featured at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Palm Springs Museum, and the University of California, Santa Barbara. His new book is Making L.A. Modern, about Craig Ellwood, and he joins us from that amazing Niemeyer house in Santa Monica. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Hey, I noticed that Ray Kapp did the foreword for your book.
Yes.
How's he doing? He must be in his 90s now, right?
Yeah, he's getting up there, but he's doing great and still working and doing relevant work and was thrilled to talk about his friend Craig Ellwood because he knew him well, and it was important to me to get people that spent time professionally and personally with the myth and the man.
Ray Kapp started a school for architecture called SciArc think that was in the early 70s, maybe 74.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Sometime around there. Do you know if his friend Craig Ellwood ever spoke at the school?
That's a good question. Not sure about that. Ray wrote a really nice forward, kind of sidestepping the issues that you mentioned, the lack of professional credentials and training, and just got to the heart of it, which is design. There's many world-renowned architects that didn't have a license either. Marcel Breuer, Garrett Rietveld. It's
Charles Gwathmey for a while.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, it was nice of Ray to just get to the contribution and not get tangled up in the, lack of credentials argument, which most architects, feel that, because he's not an official architect that you can't contribute to the field. But I think Ellwood is living proof that that's not true.
Well, it seems like a lot of that was fueled out of jealousy because Ellwood's designs were just crazy good.
Yeah, they were. I mean, it's a delicate issue, especially in the time that he was working. And part of the idea behind the book is that if you look at it from today's vantage point, that there really isn't an issue. In other words, back in the day, in the 50s and early 60s, when people say, Andy Warhol doesn't even, physically make his own work, or Donald Judd, phones in RAL colors to Switzerland. This was controversy. But of course, today it's really not. As many artists, Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, everything's farmed out. Everything is kind of a lot of it is the promotional expertise and the kind of impresario role more than, creating something with your own hands. So I think that, Craig Ellwood would not be as controversial today as he was when he was working.
Let's go back to the start. You've got Johnny Burke working in Texas, starting a construction company and becoming Craig Ellwood. And what were some of his first commissions?
Well, he started, I think one of the really crucial things was that he was the cost estimator. His only actual training in architecture and design and building was in a cost estimating course at UCLA that he went to at night. And he ended up being the cost estimator for the Eames House, which is one of the most famous and celebrated case study houses, and also the John and Tenza House, the editor of Arts and Architecture magazine, the magazine that sponsored the program for the case study houses. So he immediately
was that the Harwell Harris house designed for John and Tenza?
I believe it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's right next door to the Eames House, and he would sort of go back and forth. And the Eames House is interesting because prefabricated parts were ordered, and in between ordering these prefabricated industrial elements, and then, this is folklore, so we don't know. I really tried to research and see if it was true. Talked to many people in the Eames office and could not verify it, but people have told versions like the Eameses went and saw a Mies van der Rohe show and saw that there was a lot of similarities between the design they had conceived and this Mies project, and they wanted to change it, and yet these elements were already ordered. So on the spot, the Eames House became, literally split in two, and there was a studio building as a separate building and a house. And so Craig Ellwood, Johnny Burke, was in the middle of this. And I think that, this is where he really got to see, beyond building and construction, where the conceptual part of it all comes in, and even kind of redistributing these prefabricated parts. And of course, it was an amazing success, as the Eames House is probably, one of the most famous modernist houses in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And celebrated by architects of all types and generally recognized as a master work. So, he was funny because he had other architects doing the work, and at first the office was totally under the spell of Le Corbusier. So you can see that in some of the projects. And a little later, he settled on Mies as the focus. And, now, of course, he's referred to as, the California Mies. And then I say, he feminized Mies and he domesticated industrial production and was able, because of the climate in California, not only the meteorological climate, but also the climate of architectural thought and open-minded clients, he was able to put forth this idea of the indoor-outdoor living, which started, a decade or two before with a lot of Viennese emigres, Neutra and Schindler being, the two most famous ones. So the idea of indoor-outdoor living had come before, but somehow it crystallized in the work that came out of Craig Ellwood and Associates, the office. So it was really in his connoisseurship and eye for detail, not only detailing at the Eames house, but also looking at the work of others, Le Corbusier and Mies and the masters, and saying, I'd like to bring this forward, but it can be a little bit lighter on its feet here, and it can be adapted for this Southern California climate.
Well, how did he make the jump from being a cost estimator to getting the clients? I mean, there are a lot of architects in Southern California. How did he come to prominence to get these commissions?
Well, he was the thing that's funny is the only professional practice of his before being in construction was as a male model. So I talk about the fact that he was really good looking and always up to date with his clothes and cars and essentially connoisseurship. And so he was great with people. And as soon as John Intenza, the editor of Arts and Architecture magazine, took him in and put his name on a couple of projects, potential clients didn't say, hey, I want to see your license. They just knew what my main point is, which is he just saw to it that sublime buildings got made. He wasn't really concerned with what idea came from where. Now, of course, everyone that worked in his office has a different opinion about that. And it's definitely a fact that every Thursday in Malibu for years in a bar, everyone that used to work at Craig Ellwood and Associates would get together and talk about this fact that he didn't share credit. Same kind of complaints were made about the Eames office, and Ellwood and I think Eames both argued, like, look, we just need a simple kind of catchy name, like in the case of Craig Ellwood. In fact, I did some research and found out that he named it Craig Ellwood and Associates before he even thought that he would change his name to Craig Ellwood. And I guess the first time the phone rang, he said, "Oh, I guess someone asked for Craig Ellwood." He goes, "Oh, I guess that's me." So,
boy, there's
he was really, an
I like this guy.
impresario,
Yeah.
and very charming and articulate. And the fact remains that all of the principals, some of who were extremely talented, the work did not measure up without his influence to the work that was under his, supervision. And the whole book came about because I restored the Steinman House from 1956 with the principal being Gerald Lomax. And I was in touch with Gerald Lomax and knew the stories about Craig Ellwood, had always loved Craig Ellwood, and all the work that I saw. And everyone said to me, he cannot draw at all. He's never made a drawing. Like, he can't do anything. And I found at the Steinman House, rolled up inside of a drawer, the craziest architectural drawing I've ever seen, which was immediately ridiculous and repulsive and fascinating and incredible, because you could see in this one drawing that this was somebody that was trying to fashion himself an architect. It was literally as if, wow, their perspective is crazy and the scale makes no sense, and this drawing is kind of ridiculous, and yet it looks like someone has really got strong opinions about details, and that was really what led me to say, hey, I really have to know more about this character, because this is a kind of a crazy drawing. and look at all the work that came out of it. So he didn't let that get in his way, I guess I'll say that.
When Craig Ellwood started the office, was he at that time already married to Gloria Henry?
Yes.
Okay.
And was that her real name?
Who was Dennis the Menace's mom on TV. So she was the famous actress, and they really were kind of the it couple, 50s and 60s Hollywood. And she was, very supportive in all ways, emotionally and even financially, until he was able to get enough clients to sustain an office.
And how long did the office go on?
Well, the office went on, to the mid-'70s and late '70s. But one of the most heartbreaking stories that I've ever heard in being a historian and architecture geek of modernism is the story that Jean Prouvé, probably the greatest kind of like engineer designer, also not an architect, in France, died in 1984, and he told his daughter, don't worry, I really died in 1954, 30 years ago, when he lost control of his own company. In other words, the aluminum industry in Paris, sort of said, you're out, and it was his thing. And it was so frustrating. Ellwood was kind of pushed out mostly with the buildings that were being continued that were in the office before. Suddenly, the climate of the world in the 70s was really like, let's go to the designer directly, and the figurehead doesn't matter. And so he just sort of saw the writing on the wall and ended up retiring and moving to Italy to paint. And so, I think it's...
If he could draw, could he paint?
That's a really good question. And I'm not interested in his painting because I don't think that there's a lot of invention there, where I would actually say there's a lot of invention that happened with his designs and architecture. He was capable, but they look like kind of bad, Anaskevich or, sort of op art exercises. They look more like abstract exercises than like a painting that resonates or is really intuitive or something. So
I don't have to rush out and try to find a Craig Ellwood original online somewhere?
I would not bother myself. And I actually, it was the one time I was quite unpopular in putting together the book with my team, which included his daughter, Erin Ellwood, who was incredible to work with, and a host of contributors that were really fantastic. As I said, look, the paintings really take this conversation off course. So it's got to be just a couple of the simpler ones because they get very kind of op art. The complexity is sort of distracting to the central argument, I thought. So I had to really edit that. So I think there's only like 4 images of his painting. So I would say, there's not many people that would argue that he's a great painter. But the thing that's interesting that Jeffrey Head says in it, who wrote about the painting, is that, some architects do painting as an exercise, and it can be competent to have like insight into their design DNA, or they can actually go on to be, first-rate artists in their own right, like Le Corbusier as an example, where there's some really great paintings and drawings. Ellwood, I think, is more in the other category, where it's more interesting, in the context of his architectural work.
I know from the old Hawaii Five-0 series, Jack Lord became an artist in his post Hawaii Five-0
Now,
career.
the real question is, now do we go and look for Jack Lords? That might be interesting.
Yeah.
And Leonard Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy, he had an art career too.
Yep.
Quite a few people. So
it's true, and I paint, and I like doing it all. I almost think that I paint to understand painting better, and I design, because I'm mostly in restoration. My role is to be invisible. My best job is if it looks like I was never there. There is no program that I have of my own. It's all about the voice of the architect. I've done Paul Rudolph and John Lautner and Schindler and Ellwood and Neutra. And so the closer I can be to invisible, the better.
Well, when I paint, Michael, people really want me to be invisible because I do it so badly. They just don't invite me to come over at all. And it's a real win-win for everybody.
Have you ever tried using two coats?
I don't even use a no, none of that.
Oh, well.
Michael, you have quite a storied history doing the restoration, as you mentioned. I want to reel off some of these. You have worked on Lautner's Chemisphere House, Thornton Ladd's House for a Writer, there. Paul Rudolph's Penthouse, 75. You worked on
the whole building, actually.
You've worked on Lautner's Harvey House.
Yes.
Kelly Lynch's house. She's been a guest on the show.
Yep.
You've worked on Schindler's McCalman House.
Yep.
Neutra's Weirin House. Is it Weirin or Weirin?
Weirin.
Weirin?
Yep.
Another Lautner house, the Foster House.
Yep.
And Quincy Jones, the architect, not the musician, the Silverstein House, 1965.
Yeah, and the other thing is many, many others that are not famous architects, because I don't just gravitate to stuff because it's famous. I gravitate to it, based on its quality. And exactly like artists, if you go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York or something, it just becomes a qualitative argument. And some of these people, you think, wow, this guy only designed one house and this was it, but he was an animator at Disney, or this, who was this guy? Well, he was an engineer, but he did a great house in the Bay Area, because I work in the San Francisco Bay Area and, working on a William Worcester house right now with a Thomas Church Garden and Lawrence Halprin and other projects, Clarence Mayhew's, names that aren't, household names, but the work that needs to be saved needs to be saved. And, modernism is such a kind of inspiring field to be in because when you become like a house whisperer for these kind of things, what doesn't fit into place. And you go into this streamlined modern house and go, oh, wow, wait, somebody put up, crown molding everywhere. That's going to all have to come out, But you have to do really mostly surgical removal is mostly what I do, is to just delaminate all the kind of misguided, quote, improvements, unquote, from like subsequent owners. And then it's funny the number of times that owners can't really see it, and then you start to peel it back even before we're doing finish work, and you can already feel this kind of idea of like a frame for living or equipment for living. Le Corbusier thought of it as sort of equipment and furniture as equipment, and William Worcester talks about, frames for living. So it's really exciting to watch that come back alive in front of the owners because it's surprising. I was working at the Weirin House from 1949 by Neutra in the Hollywood Hills, which is right across the street from Frank Lloyd Wright House, and I found in a very rare German periodical the original Neutra design for the hardscapes. And because I had immediately thought, this is a really weird way to get to the front door. It's got to kind of come from over here. And I started to formulate my ideas for how I would do it, even if I had not turned up the correct documentation. But I did, and there it was. It was pretty much what I was thinking. I put this great biomorphic path back the way it was, and all the neighbors and everyone come by, oh, this looks so amazing. You're doing such a great job. And I kept saying, oh, it's not me. It's Neutra. All I'm doing is going back to the original Neutra plan that was abandoned whenever that was over these, 60 years or something.
I went to a seance, and he communicated with me.
The first 10 times I said, oh, it's not. It's going back to the original plan, and people thought, I don't even know what you're talking about. So it is really great to sort of work with this level of modernist design, because when it's right, and everybody kind of knows right away.
Well, let's get back to Craig Ellwood, Michael.
Yep.
He had this outsized personality, very attractive. He was into some pretty sweet cars. I think he had a Lamborghini and a Ferrari at one time. He was hooked into...
I think the best image, like after I saw this crazy drawing, when I thought, wow, that is really amazing. Like, that is almost like a school child saying, I want to be an architect, in talking to people and getting photographs from his daughter Erin and stuff. The indelible image was Craig Ellwood walking his pet ocelot, wearing tennis whites and a giant afro like Mike Brady.
Mike Brady. That takes me back.
Who was an architect in the
Brady Bunch
series.
Kids, look it up.
Oh, yeah, right. The character was an architect.
Yeah, he had that big afro.
Right. So I think there might be, that character might be based on Craig Ellwood because it was a Hollywood thing, but I have no proof of that. But he looked exactly like that with, the complete round, 12-inch, circle on his head with, super tight, tennis whites and his pet ocelot and pulling up to his lime green Lamborghini where the personalized license plate was Vroom, VROOOM. So that's another thing that really kept coming up again and again, which I found fascinating, which is, all the profusion and noise of his personal countenance and what he presented to the world, and then the silence and beauty and restraint of the work. Very flamboyant and, really kind of Baroque in a lot of personal habits, and decadent and self-indulgent and, wild, and then the exact opposite in the work. And I found that fascinating as well.
Did Ellwood's homes go through a down period where nobody wanted them or they were tearing them down?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in general that, when postmodernism sort of took over in the mid-'60s, announced by Robert Venturi's, Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture and Memphis and all of this kind of language of architecture, which was everything that modernists, all my heroes, were striving to avoid, which is, irony and humor and, a lot of kind of more literary gimmicks and things instead of, what you see is what you get, honesty in materials, truth in design. That really sort of took over, and I would imagine from probably 1975 to maybe 1985, probably, it was completely looked down upon and demolished and stuff like that. And then Kara Greenberg's Mid-Century Modern, which came out in 1984, and I talked to her the other day and said, that's everybody's Bible, just so you know. That was the first time we all, saw it. There was a little bit of consciousness that came up around the mid-'80s, and then since then, it's been building, and people know what it is, and they know that you're not going to repaint a Picasso or a Miro, and, similarly, you should hesitate before you try to improve, work of this quality. So I think now it's in the consciousness in LA.
And these houses are still really prized by people who buy them and fix them up and live in them. I mean, they love them.
Yeah, well, it's a very collectible field, which is exciting, but it's also, not without complications because it's definitely a trade-off. It's exactly like an old Ferrari or Lamborghini, which is, they're so beautiful, but then, you try to shut the window in the rain and, the gaskets don't quite fit in the rubber and, the houses have some idiosyncrasies or outmoded technology or things that, have maybe been improved in some ways since then. So it's, you have to kind of sacrifice a little bit, you know what I mean? But once you know that you have a vintage car and you're willing to take that on, and once you know that you have a house from 1949 or 1957, and, we don't want to embed smart technology in the walls of your Neutra house, I'm sort of very pro-analog, and it's just analog, and that's why I like it. It was before the internet. It was before, everything was computer aided. How often do we look around now and look at, newly built structures and just know immediately it was done on a computer? It doesn't have any kind of
character,
human scale to a lot of the detailing and stuff, that it's just just because you can do it on a computer doesn't mean that you should do it on a computer. And so I think, the sacrifice is worth it to the owners.
Now, Michael, let's play a little Stump the Band. I'm going to give you an obscure Ellwood house and see what you know about it. So this is the Edinger House in Crestwood Hills.
Right.
According to one author, Jackson, it was never built. According to a subsequent book by Perez Mendez, it was built, but destroyed by fire. Do you know anything about this one?
I do believe, I mean, I know that the Perez book was later, and that is the understanding of like people that I've talked to, is that it was built and it burnt down, but it's not around anymore, and that's all I know about that one.
It's completely gone.
I mean, what was interesting about the book is I'm not that kind of like encyclopedia head that everything that he did, I covered. It's sort of like a broad cultural look at, mid-century modern LA and, kind of the contribution from the office. Because some of the work, especially the early work, is pretty awkward, and he would even say that. I mean, he would even say that, certain solutions weren't as ironed out as they were later. And I do have kind of favorites of the associate architects that did the work. I won't say who they are, but it's pretty obvious if you read the book. So
okay,
it's not just as in some of the not famous houses by unknown architects are worth saving. Not everything that the Craig Ellwood office touched is automatically this great thing, because there was a lot of kind of searching for a original voice in the beginning, especially, and even later when it got sort of overbearing, and the scale of the fascias went up, and it got to be sort of corporate looking. Like, for example, I feel like the residences in the case of the Craig Ellwood office are so kind of delicate, even though they're very Miesian. There's a kind of very delicate sensitivity to it, and I think that was lost in some of the larger scale buildings. Not South Bay Bank, but in some of the larger industrial buildings.
Did Ellwood's office do a great deal of commercial work?
Not a great deal. Some, but that was not the forte, and that is kind of the later office again. It's really like the early work and the late work was not really on my radar as much as this incredible run, from the case study program through, I would say, the Pelesky House in Palm Springs from 1958.
Oh, that's a beautiful house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Although it's really a hacienda and really very un-Ellwood-like in many ways, but it is a beautiful house, and there is some real sensitivity there, but that's kind of the last one. So I didn't, really go into, a lot of stuff that was very early or very late for that reason.
So, Michael, let's assume that I'm your client and I have a spouse who's really not into architecture, and we buy a mid-century modernist house by a fairly famous architect. So I'm sure something that comes up a lot that you have to navigate is, how do you make decisions, both as owners and with you as the advisor to this couple? How do you make decisions about what to dial the clock back to 1954 and what to make 2018? How do you choose what to modernize and what to restore completely?
Well, of course, the first question is make sure you're married to the right person, because if they don't like modernist architecture, if they're talking about shingles, then we all have to head to the hills. No, I'm kidding. But
okay.
No, it really is kind of part psychology, and, I'm there mostly to kind of keep it all honest and say, well, yeah, that's not really an Ellwood idea, or that's kind of changing this Neutra house too much. I'll say this, it really depends on the project. And one of the things is sometimes it is better to get a regionally known architect where you don't have, every architect all over the world saying, did you just do what I think you just did to the, landmark that we all, studied in school? Because you have, a wider berth for kind of reinterpreting the language or extending the language to include additions or things like that. But I'm like a painting conservator, so I'm very conservative when it comes to these buildings, especially when they're just known and documented, and who would want to change it. And I really have had the conversation
like Priscilla Presley turning her John Lautner into a hacienda.
Right. Or, somebody tore down a Lautner in Beverly Hills, and it actually ended up being sort of a relative of a friend of my wife's. So we were sort of mortified. And, and people do tear it down, but I have had conversations with certain people, and it's not really after they've bought it. A lot of times they'll come in and talk to me before they commit to buying it. And I'll say, yeah, I think what you're talking about, you should maybe do somewhere else, because you're never going to turn this 1956, modest home into the thing with the mud room and the, sauna and,
right.
The
home
exercise
theater
room.
Yeah.
And besides, who needs a mud room in Los Angeles anyway? It's like, so I try to be very conservative about the building, the frame, the structure. And then, if somebody, really wants to make a different kind of a statement with furniture or, interiors, that's always possible. But the actual structure, I try to be, very sober, and I'm kind of like a police dog on that.
Do you have any restorations undergoing right now that you could tell us about?
Well, yeah, some of the more exciting ones that I'm doing a project in Culver City called the Venda Museum, which is art of the Cold War, which is, suddenly relevant again because of, the state of everything today. But it's a 1948 armory that was poured aggregate concrete and really, really beautiful. And I ended up doing the landscape and the logo and kind of the whole restoration of the building. And it's a perfect example of something where the designers and architects are anonymous, but I immediately, recognize this as, just a first-rate building and really beautifully scaled, really high execution in the way that it was built, and would be prohibitive to do something like that today. So that's a fun one. And then the 1940 William Worcester House in San Francisco with the Thomas Church Garden is really exciting also. But then I do, consulting, which is not full restorations, but kind of different levels of Q&A about how a building could be used, repurposed, what could go on there, what really couldn't go on there. If someone wants to add another structure, what does that mean to the site? How close can you build to the landmark building? Those kinds of things.
Michael, do you have a website or Instagram feed people can visit?
My website, I have a couple. BoydDesign.com it got a lot of the restoration and landscape stuff on it, and then plainfurniture.com is my furniture company. But as I said, I'm kind of analog, so I don't do any of the social media, in keeping with my almost invisible status that I go through. But those websites, have some interesting things to see, and it has a lot of the books that I've contributed to, and writings and things. But I also consult for museums and the restoration of historical modernist furniture, for example, and the vetting of historical modernist furniture. Basically, just a modernism geek of the first order.
Well, Michael, thank you for becoming visible for a few minutes with us today. We really appreciate that.
Only briefly, yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to, always happy to talk about all things modernist.
Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You may have noticed that my good friend and co-host Frank King has not been on the show much lately. Frank is in high demand, performing around the world on cruise ships as a comedian and lecturing around the country. Profound and powerful and funny TED Talks on mental health. You can see all his work at frankking.com. Frank is a warm, informed, and hilarious speaker for any audience. After more than 3 years on the podcast, actually since the very beginning, he leaves us today to more fully pursue speaking and performing. Frank, I can't thank you enough, and we all wish you well. Thanks to our development director, Rebecca Laney, for stepping up today on today's show.
Thanks to everybody for listening. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special agent for Modernist Houses, 919-9950-550.
Visit usmodernist.org to listen to past shows and discover our massive mid-century modernist archives. US Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Cindy Stratton, not her real name, researches guests from a secret witness protection program inside Starbucks. US Modernist Radio is a production of Triangle Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational organization for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. Friends don't let friends eat Twix in one bite.
No.
George and Tom will be back in 2 weeks with another candy trending edition of US Modernist Radio.
You're so sweet.